Hello again, welcome back. Here we are to continue our study of Swift, and in particular SwiftUI right now. In the last video, we created the calculator interface and we got some of the business logic working. So behind the scenes, you're able to type on some keys, add a decimal point, type some numbers in here, and you can click the clear button. Currently, the operation keys here don't do anything, right? So what I'd like to do is tackle these right now and see if we can get plus, minus, times, and divide working. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to go to the global state Swift object that we created here. And before we get started with the solution, let's outline our solution with some pseudocode and some diagrams. You know, if we had a whiteboard, we could write it all out on the whiteboard. I'm going to write it here in a comment, okay? So the calculator is more complicated than it looks. There's actually behind the scenes, there's some logic that's happening here. Let's watch what happens when we use the calculator. If I type the number 2, it puts a 2 here. And then if I type a 1, it tacks a 1 onto the end. And we've got that working. If I hit an operation, watch what happens. So if I hit the plus sign, right, it shows me like a little outline here. That's part of the user interface, so we're gonna ignore that for now. But notice that as being something has happened, right? Notice that something's happened here. And what the computer has done is it's stored this value for later. It's stored this operation for later. And it knows that we're ready to enter a new number. So if I was to type a 4 followed by a 3, right? It's just like before, except when I hit the 4, it erased the 21. But the 21 is hidden in the background. It's stored. The computer is holding on to that. And then as I type, it starts doing the same thing we did before. It replaces the first character. And then when I type a 3, it appends the 3. And now watch what happens when I hit another operation, like if I hit minus. Okay, it takes the 21 and the 43, adds them together to get 64. And it stores this in the background and saves the operation and then is ready to add another number. So if I was to type a 1 and a 2, that's a 12. If I hit the plus sign again, it's going to do the math, store the 52 off to the side, and then remember the operation, okay? And actually it's a little more complicated than that. So I'm doing the simplified version right now, believe it or not, right? So don't underestimate the calculator, okay? It's smarter than me anyway, right? So at least it does math better, right? So let's write down what's happening here. So I'm gonna create a variable called stored value, right? I'm gonna write it out in pseudocode right now. So, there'll be a variable somewhere, might not be called stored value. I think it's gonna be called stored value, but I'm gonna put it here. And then we've got another variable called operation maybe, right? And that's the operation that we're doing. And then we've got a variable called display, and we actually currently have this one. So this is what we're showing on the screen, okay? And then we've got another variable that's begin input, okay? So what are these? When the application begins, let's say, and stored value could be anything. Let's say that it's an optional because maybe sometimes it doesn't have a value. So I'm going to call it nil for now. And then operation is the same way. So maybe it's also an optional and it doesn't have a value when a calculator boots up, right? When it initializes, we don't know what the operation is, so it's nil, right? And display shows a 0, and it actually shows it as a string, so we'll put it in quotes, right? And begin input is true because we're going to begin inputting some values. So it's a Boolean maybe, and it's true. Okay, so what happens if you type the number 2? Well, stored value is still nil. Operation is still nil because we haven't hit an operation yet, right? And displayed value, since begin input is true, we replace the value here with the key that you hit. So for us, it's the number 2. And since we've begun our input, at that moment, we set this to false. Okay? So now that's the state of our calculator. It's showing the number 2. It's got nothing stored in the background, and there's no operation set. And begin input is false because we know someone has begun input. So next, let's say you type the number 20 or the number 1 to follow the 2 because you want to input 21. So stored input is still nil. The operation is still nil because you haven't hit an operation yet. And instead of replacing the current value, we append the value to the number 2. Okay, so we append the number 1 onto the number 2. Let's do this. So let's do, let's also put this in here. Let's say init, right? That's how you initialize. And then over here, we're going to say taps the number 2, right? And in this case right here, you this is false, right? And here what you did is you tapped the number, taps the number 1, okay? So now let's say you hit the plus sign on the calculator, right? So there's a few things that are going to happen here, right? So let's actually do this. Let's say taps plus, right? That'll be the thing that just happened. So what we did is we're going to convert this number here to a decimal number and put it in the stored value. So we take the value here, convert it to a number, so it's going to be 21.0. We'll show that as a double, right? Okay. And then you hit the plus sign, so we're going to store this here as our enum, right? So we've got that. And then this still shows the number 21, but we set begin input to true because we want to begin inputting a new number. Okay, so next, let's do, let's say we got 21 stored here. And let's say you hit the number, we hit the plus sign. Let's say you want to add 4, right? So we've still got, actually, let's do it like I did it the last time. So let's say you tap the number 4, right? So we've still got 21 stored in the stored value. We've still got the plus sign stored in the operation. And begin input was true, so we replace this value with the key that you pressed. So that's a number 4, okay? And at that moment, we set begin input to false, okay? So let's say now you hit the number, let's say 2, right? Or let's say 3, just so we can use another number, right? So we'll say taps 3, right? So still you've got 21 stored in the stored value. You've got plus stored in the operation. And since begin input was false, you're going to append the 3 to the number here, right? So we've got 43 there. And then this is still false, okay? So let's do one more operation, right? So let's say now you tap on the plus sign again, right? Because we tapped, oh, I made a mistake. I put a, oh yeah, I did a 3 there. Let's say you tap on the minus sign now, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to tap, oops, taps minus, okay? So what's going to happen here is we're going to convert the 43 to a decimal. Look at this value here to do the math, and then do the math, right? So what do? We got 43, we convert it to a number, so it's 43 as a double. plus 21, that's 64, right? So we'll do 64.0. And so we just did the math here, and we have to look at the operation to do that, right? So we look at the operation, we do the math, we convert it to a double, and we put it in the stored value. And then we set the operation. So the operation is now minus, and we take the value here and we show it in the displayed value. So we'll show 64.0 here, and we set begin input to true again. Okay, so there's the journey of the calculator and what should happen inside. And these are the variables that I'm proposing. Okay, so there's an outline, and I'm going to leave that maybe for you to try on your own as a challenge. So here's what I've outlined here, and all of this stuff, you know, is pretty much mostly going to happen here, though in your content Swift, you may use some of these things, right? But pretty much most of the work is going to happen in here, okay? Right? So you can define your new variables up at the top here, and then you can create a case to handle your plus, minus, multiply, and divide buttons here. This step where we take the value here, the operation, and the number here, and do the math, I broke that out into its own function, so I'd kind of recommend that. I think that that's a good way to handle that. Okay, so thanks for watching. I'll provide the solution in the next video, but this is the outline here for what you need to solve, right? So so go with it, do what you can, see what you come up with, and then you can follow and check your solution against mine in the next video, or you know, look for an answer there if you get stuck. Okay, thanks for watching.